Thank you for auditing the Always Positive New Music Review Show hosted by a French professor who promises I didn't make this title just for the pun. I mean, the question is, has Neil Young gotten old? Maybe even a better question is, has he in the past? Can Neil Young get old? Is he forever young? But before I get into this discussion, I wanted to just take a second to just put some things into perspective, because I'm going to be talking a lot about ages and generations. So last Friday, I'm getting ready, I'm getting ready to go off to my work, my kids are getting ready to go off to school, and I noticed that my daughter is wearing her brother's Nirvana shirt. And, I just sort of registered it. It's funny. I never really would have thought in high school that a band that I liked, that was a cool, young, rebellious band, would be worn by my kids 30 years later. And then later I was teaching prenominal adjectives. So in French, some adjectives come before the noun, some come after. And one that comes after is amusant, which means funny. And so I asked the question, qui est un acteur amusant? Who is a funny actor? And in both classes where I taught this, the first answer was Adam Sandler. So I'm like, lunchtime, kids. I'm flashing back to all my favorite Adam Sandler bits. Goat. All the great working out. I had all these like Adam Sandler bits in my head. I'm thinking about Billy Madison. I'm thinking about I cashed out on Adam Sandler with that movie Little Nicky. I mean, we're talking so long ago. But I'm sort of thinking about how this, in the same day, we have these two symbols of Generation X, apathy, coarseness, anxiety, humor, everything. And it made me realize, it's a natural progression. Because when I was there and I was listening to Nirvana, I was also obviously listening to Neil Young. That was my number one musical influence growing up. In high school, I listened to probably 70% Neil Young, 30% anything else. And so it's this weird thing where there's definitely a cycle of nostalgia for a time that you didn't live through. And it seems as though that 30-year period is the sweet period, So in the 80s, there's all that nostalgia for the 50s, and 60s to 90s, and 20s to 90s. It all kind of makes sense. But what's interesting is, now we're 60 years in to Neil Young's career. 60-ish, whatever, almost 60. And the thing about him is how he's managed to not ever age. Not really. I mean, obviously he gets older, but he managed to not do what other people of his generation did, which made my appreciation for Neil Young different than my children's appreciation for Nirvana. Because it would be like if Kurt Cobain was still around making great music. Maybe it's more akin to my son being a fan of Radiohead, whatever, who still stay artistically viable. I mean, in the 80s, when everyone else was just sort of going on greatest hits tours and cashing it in, Neil Young was making albums like Reactor, like Trans, the album with the Shocking Pinks. He kept young while other people were getting old by just sort of following his own muse and doing his own thing. Which makes this album interesting, because the first thing I thought of when listening to it was, wow, Neil Young has gotten old. And he's done so because he reminds me of my parents' generation. I'll get more specific about that. Now, obviously, I think part of this whole idea of listening to older music is mediating your relationship with your parents' generation. I think there is a part of my children's love of Radiohead, for example, that is sort of understanding how I grew up, what I cared about, as a way to sort of better understand me. I mean, obviously the music bangs, as the kids say these days. It's totally groovy. But, there is some degree to that. And it's a little bit funny for me because really growing up, my parents only listened to Frank Zappa. I mean, that was it. A little later down on the alphabet than Young. So, I wonder, I'm trying to think, was part of why I listened to Neil Young so much a way of mediating my relationship with my parents? I mean, there are similarities, staunchly liberal, ex-hippie, both sort of hippies, sort of not. I wouldn't actually call Neil Young a hippie artist. I wouldn't even call my parents hippies, but very hippie adjacent, very boomery, we can change the world, boy do we hate Reagan energy. But what about now? Now that my dad and Neil Young are in their 80s, I don't know, Neil Young, maybe he's 78, but he's going to be in his 80s soon. And I realized about this album is that it's so much like visiting with my dad, listening to this album. Like visiting with my dad now. So if you don't know, he lives down the street. He's one of my Patreons. He watches many of my videos, sometimes months later, and so hi. What's up, Pa? But, you know, I go to visit him, and there's obviously great parts, and there's hard parts with any family. But there's this thing, you know, where you sort of observe the way that people change when they get to a certain age, you know, when they get to be their 80s. And I want to make it clear, there's no part of me that's mocking this. It's one of the most short-sighted things you can do is mock people for how they act when they're older. I could tell you, as a guy who's in his 40s, the joke like, oh, you wake up and every day something hurts. Yeah, don't laugh at that. Don't laugh at people who say that. That's a real thing that needs to be observed. But the similarity that I feel between these two projects, I mean, two people, between visiting my dad sometimes and listening to this particular Neil Young project, is a combination of sort of what I call cable news dread and Weather Channel consumption. So let me explain. The Fox News gets a bad rap, and it deserves the bad rap for sort of poisoning elderly people's minds. Which it does. But there's a sort of a corollary of MSNBC, which is another channel, which is very overtly political to one side, and does a lot of the same tricks that Fox News does, of generating outrage. Just unbelievable, blinding, can you believe it, outrage. Now, my dad picked up that I don't really like talking about that stuff, so it's cool. You know, we talk about some. I mean, obviously, we have to talk about politics. He's a very smart guy, reads more newspapers than he watches MSNBC, so that's fine. But definitely I can always sort of tell, like, when the outrage mill has worked and got him worked up. And I'm not laughing. There's no part of me that's making fun of this. This statistically is going to be me. It won't be MSNBC, it'll be called something else, but this appears to be a part of aging, of reaching a certain age, where you get this sense of outrage. Mixed in with is this weather thing, which is another thing I don't get. And it's a joke that everybody makes. Oh, old people care about the weather. If everybody does it, then I'm going to do it too. You know, at a certain age, I'm going to say, you know, I wonder if there's a drought in Colorado. I can't explain it, all right? Maybe you could explain it if you felt it or if you studied it. And this album by Neil Young, The World Record, is totally in that zone. It is totally an album of somebody who is feeling a large amount of outrage at the way the world is compared to how the way the world was. It's filled with these provocative, poetic meditations and this sort of anger at the world that is being left behind. And that's the sort of similarity that I see. And a sense of powerlessness to change it. Now, I'm going to get into this later, but obviously, for me, as someone who is of the younger generation, I get frustrated because I'm like, well, yeah, you're powerless to change it now, but you know, you held the reins for a long time. You grew up in a time that's literally called the greatest time on human earth, and now you're upset about it. But I'm not going to be critical. I'm not going to be cynical on this too much. But, you know, a lot of it is on this idea of sort of how great things used to be. And that's the thing which my dad will talk to me about sometimes, you know, like how these poetic evocations of youth, and they do sometimes just sort of talk about just things being better. Now, I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second. I believe that 2022 is a million times better than 1954. And I'm sorry, boomers, I just believe that's true. Not only is 2022 better than 1954, it's better than 1999 when I was young, okay? But it's an understandable thing that people have these opinions and these feelings. And what's funny is with Neil, it goes even further to where these discussions of weather are primarily about the seasons. And he literally sings as though the sun does not rise or set anymore, okay? Like that's sort of an actual theme of like that there are no more seasons and that the sun doesn't rise and set. To which I say, dude, move back to Toronto, okay? Or Canada or whatever. He was born in Manitoba and then moved to down in North Ontario, whatever it is. Just move back to Canada, okay? You're in California too much. Of course the sun doesn't rise, it doesn't set. Everything's on fire. Of course there's no seasons. It's California. But when we sort of combine all these things, this sense of dread and the seasons, it all comes into this environmentalism. And this is the environmentalism that really rules this whole album. And I almost didn't review it. I hate environmental music. I don't like Midnight Oil. I went to an Earth Day concert in 1991, and I hated every single time someone would start preaching to me about the environment. I just don't like it, okay? I don't even like it when Radiohead does it. And Radiohead's like my favorite band, okay? I don't like it. Oh, are you going to clean up the oil spill? Good job, Tom, you know? And especially coming from an older generation, that's what's weird about this whole feeling, is that we're all trying to find the guys who did this. Right? Who is responsible for all of this? What's going on? Why is the environment so bad? What can we do? What has happened? And listen, I am not better than the people I'm criticizing right now. That's not my point. But the point is that if you're in, if you see that you are closer to death than you would like to be, and you're thinking about the world that's going to be left behind, sort of powerlessly complaining and providing empty solutions that cannot possibly solve anything, when you spent your entire life consuming and contributing to this problem, it rings false. It's like you don't get to just enjoy all the benefits of all this waste and consumption, and then at the very, 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 very end say, oh, come on, look at the world. You got to save the world, man. We're all trying to find the guys who did this. And to be clear, that's the environmental thing is not a thing that is shared with my dad. My dad, well, he'll mention it, but it's not like this album doesn't make me think of that. But just this general sense of things are really bad. But the thing about this idea is that it's paired with something really good. So I'm emphasizing the sort of negativity and a sort of hypocrisy, which I was going to talk about it later. But Neil Young actually sings about being scared about buying a Chevrolet on this album because he doesn't want to waste fuel. Neil, you released a song in 1980, I don't know what, called Who's Driving My Car Now, where you literally said, there's too many Datsuns on the road. Hey, Neil, maybe don't sing about buying bad American cars. Maybe instead encourage people to buy Datsuns. Because if people bought Datsuns in 1980, if America never goes back to its whole truck culture, they would actually have saved the world. That's what I'm saying. Like, you were part of the problem when it was convenient, and now that you see the end, you want to try to absolve yourself, which is okay. But there's a good part to this. And the good part is that with this age, there can also be a lot of gratitude. And that's what I see with my dad and people of his generation as well. Other people in my family of that similar age, or colleagues, whatever. Like just a real gratitude. Like, wow, I'm here and I've lived this long. Like, that's great. Gratitude is the key to happiness. And there is a lot of gratitude on this album. And also a perspective. A perspective that comes when you are closer to death. I mean, it's the only thing that none of us can escape. It's the only thing that unites us all. That's the existentialists tell us. So it sounds like, I'm 13 minutes into this review, 14 minutes, and you're probably thinking, oh, Sky hates this album, he's just going to dunk on boomers. I'm not at all. Like, I find it interesting. I find the boomer perspective interesting. I find it a thing to study. But I don't think I don't want to dismiss it. And along with it, especially in the mouth of a great artist like Neil Young, this other stuff, this gratitude and this perspective makes it actually pretty strong. If I can sort of hold my nose for the bits where he's talking about let's end war, okay? Oh, wow. Oh, you boomers. You are so good at saying let's stop war. Not so good at making sure that we stop wars, but really good at saying let's end war. It's 50 straight years of saying let's end war to no effect. Zero effect. None. No wars stopped. Wars 74. No wars, 0. But that's fine. Because really, you can hold your nose when there's all this great perspective and all this great gratitude. And at the heart of it, whatever the hell Neil Young's doing, he's doing it because it's true. And he's never stopped doing that. So even though I hear this album and hear it as Neil Young, an old man, in the same way that you could probably hear his music of the 80s as Neil Young, the middle-aged man, okay? You can't, and definitely Neil Young in the 60s and 70s, Neil Young, the young man. This is Neil Young, the old man, but being very true to himself, which is what he's always done, which is why he's like one of my favorite artists. Now, this album is produced by Rick Rubin, who, if you don't know, is one of the most important producers in music. And when I saw that he was producing it, I was like, wow, is he going to do the Johnny Cash thing? Because at the end of his life, Johnny Cash released a couple albums produced by Rick Rubin, which are famous for being very sparse, pared back, and just right on the edge of death and haunting. And it's some people's favorite stuff that Rick Rubin's done, some people's favorite stuff that even Johnny Cash has done. But no, this is a Neil Young and Crazy Horse album, and I couldn't quite figure out what Rick Rubin was doing. So I watched an interview. I watched the Zane Lowe interview with Neil Young and Rick Rubin. So before I even get to my stamp, my example song, I'll tell you what I learned from this interview. One thing is, it was hard for me to watch Neil Young the way that he looks now. And there's a really dumb reason why. The way that he talks reminds me of a former dean that I've had at my school. A dean who was not particularly good for me professionally or for my department. So it's really weird because just like seeing my all-time hero and then having the voice come out of it remind me so much of this dean. I was a little bit jarring. I had another dean who talked exactly like Dustin Hoffman. Anyways, it's kind of weird. Anyway, but that's not here nor there. But the other thing was, like, he seems to have gotten more Canadian the older that he gets. Like, his accent seems stronger. And he strongly reminds me of Mike Myers in Prosthetics. Like, strongly. Like see this interview and look. And if you told me that's actually Mike Myers in Prosthetics, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. So, I don't know. There's a kind of Bob and Dougishness to the way Neil Young talks now. I don't know if it's just because he's older and he doesn't care, or he's letting it go, or maybe he's always been this way and I haven't noticed. But that's sort of interesting because I guess what it is I've always sort of seen him as someone who's tried to take on a sort of American farmer affect. And now it seems like he's sort of going to a sort of everyman Canadian affect. I don't know. And he said a few things that were great. One is he compared this album to the previous album, Barn, as the difference between zebras and horses, which is, in case you were wondering if Neil Young is still as sharp as he ever was, of course he is. That's a great comparison. It totally makes sense. They look the same, but they're totally different. He talks about how this album has flow, and he talks about how this album was written while he was walking. He apparently walks 3 miles a day. That's my man. I love walking too. And he walks and whistles, and he records the whistling on his phone. So he kept on talking about how this is melody, and this whole album is based on melody. And when you say that actually helps to put everything into context. He even says, like, I don't even know if what I'm whistling is original. And there's certainly a couple songs on this album where you're like, oh, that's something else, you know? But I think it's okay because it's sort of natural and it's true and it's coming from his mind. Definitely the low point in the interview was when Neil was asked, what can you do for the environment? And this is just... See, if you don't know, the battle between the Xers and the Boomers is, it's the parent to children generation gap, right? So it's a generation gap that's existed forever and ever and ever. It's in different forms. But it's that, the Boomers were supposed to change the world and love and peace and all that, and then they all just got selfish and just, like, stuck us with Reagan. Like, oh, great. All this led to just an insane wealth gap and greed, and everything's used up and everything sucks. Like, that was the impression that we got, So when he's asked, what can you do to help the environment? This is sort of like that moment of like, okay, hippie man, you're telling me we got to change the world. We got to love Earth. We got to just love it every single day. And what does he say? What's his answer? 48 minutes of talking about how we have to cherish the earth. Don't eat factory food if you can afford it. That's it? That's your answer? Oh, great ecologist, what a surprise. It's not a question of taking action or making sacrifices. It's a question of consuming in a way that eases your conscience. What a freaking surprise! The generation that brought you just buy a hybrid, just buy a new car. It's waste less, even though if you buy a new car, you're wasting so much environment. Just buy a used car. You could buy a used F-150 and it's better than buying a new Tesla. But it doesn't matter because it's about Whole Foods environmentalism. Feeling good about yourself as you purchase and buy. You boomers, you're still just talking about buying stuff. And you have to caveat it if you can afford it. Because the other thing is, and this is why I kind of dropped off from Neil Young a little while ago, he had this whole thing against GMOs. Yeah, that's fine. It's okay to be against GMOs as long as you understand you are for the death of 200 to 700,000 people who are living below the poverty line across the world. If you're okay with hundreds of thousands of children dying for your conscience, that's great. That's the point of no GMOs. Be a better consumer. Be a better consumer. Damn it. Always the answer with these people. By these people, I mean us. I mean me too. That's my answer too. I'm not better than Neil. I'm not better than a boomer. I'm the same way. It's how we all are living under capitalism. Because let's face it, that's actually the problem with the environment. It's the excesses of capitalism, which Neil Young benefits from, and which I benefit from, and which presumably, if you're watching this, you benefit from it too. We are all capable. We are all part of destroying the earth. But then there's the other side, right? That other side which I keep talking about. So yeah, he's the annoying hippie boomer who's making these just don't buy factory food. Is a man confronting death and its implications on the future. I mean, that's part of what makes it interesting is this crazy, not crazy, but this very strong sense of dread and fear, which many older people feel, is tied into what's going to happen in the future. So, future kids, future generations, why is his father on the cover? Why is it? Oh, wait, I should have. 1 second. Wait a minute. Wait. I'll be right back because I'm missing an opportunity here. Yeah, just wait 1 second, would you? Oh my God, how did I not even think of this? Why is his dad on the cover? Why isn't it a picture of the earth? And on the inside, all these pictures of his family. I'm not going to open this up. This is a Christmas gift from my sister-in-law from my dad. I hope she's not watching. I ruined the surprise, but it's all right. Why is it that? Why is that the picture? Because it makes sense. Because this is a question of generations. This is a question of what you leave behind. This is him imagining his father when he was getting older. His father died, I think, 2005. It's dealing with all of these questions. It's what gives it the real depth in this music. Before I finally get to an actual analysis of this album, sort of song by song. Well, this whole thing has been an essay, which I hope is interesting. Please smash the like bucket. If you're just a Neil Young fan or if you're just somebody who's older than 70 and you're pissed at me, that's okay too. But I really do mean it when I say I am not making fun of anybody. And every single criticism that I am making could be and should be leveled at me as well, okay? But it's about his lyricism. So, my favorite lyrics, my favorite Neil Young lyric of all time is I went to the radio interview and the man left me alone at the microphone. So, my favorite Neil Young lyrics are his sort of disjointed, chaotic, not very clear lyrics. But if I'm being honest, as a one-time Neil Young superfan, current Neil Young fan, I have to admit that a lot of his lyrics have always been kind of cheesy, have always been on the nose. And I think that a lot of this stuff is that ever since he broke up with Peggy, ever since the sort of the concept of like singing all these songs about love don't ring as true, it makes sense that instead of Peggy, he's singing about the earth. So that's some of the on-the-nose nature of what's happening here. So let's get into the album, huh? It's my life. Okay, click on above the banana, above Neil Young's father, who, by the way, was like just a very successful TV personality in Canada. He was on Hockey Night in Canada, you know. Very, very bourgeois. The song is called The Long Day Before. And I think a lot about mixtapes. I could grab it over there. Like I used to make mixtapes of my favorite artists, and I've made probably 10 Neil Young mixtapes over the years. And it was always like a challenge for me to figure out, what's going to make it on from the most recent album. Probably Broken Arrow was the last one that I did that for. And Broken Arrow at the time, I didn't like it that much. Now it's one of his albums. But there's always one song that really jumps out, and that's The Long Day Before. He sort of introduces it with this time signature, this pump organ. I believe it's a pump organ. It's like pump organ and accordion on this album, and I have a hard time discerning between them. Hey, I'm not a professional music dude, okay? It's a hobby I picked up in the lobby. So, just this great, I love Crazy Horse. I love when he works with Crazy Horse. I think they are a great band. I think they are great in their limitations. I think their limitations are a feature, not a bug. I think they are great. So Ralph Molina's on drums, on the brushes. Nice kind of moving bridge at a certain point with these harmonies of everyone singing behind. On the fourth verse, we have the nice oohs behind. Again, I can't quite figure out what is Rick Rubin doing, other than I think creating a flow to the album that really works and helping to pick takes and just providing a good sort of ambitious atmosphere as far as I can tell. And I think this has the best poetry in the album. I think this is sort of, with older artists, you have to sort of imagine that they're thinking about the end, that they're thinking about the possibility that this is their last album. I mean, Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind is like the great farewell album. The great Now I'm Gonna Die album. Now, that was like 24 years ago, and he's still making good albums, and he's still touring, he's still doing fine. But that's, to me, like a great failed I'm Gonna Die album, and it's a very good album. But I think, to me, this song kind of feels like a goodbye to his sort of life poem, to love and you and me, like his sort of general poetry that is just basically always about you and me, and who the you is changes, but the me doesn't. In the old days and in the newer days, the present days and the future days, tomorrow will never be late if your dreams can come true. So, what does that mean? I don't quite know, but I like the way he sings it. The present days and the future days, tomorrow will never be late. So it seems to be this song is a real question of appreciation and living in the moment, right? A kind of carpe diem thing. On the true days and the lying days, the crowd stays in the purple haze, floating down from the sky. That's where it shows. On the TV and the newscasts, they're never going to talk about. On the front page of the internet, you're never going to talk about the big thing in the room that's happening now. So this is my favorite lyric because I don't know what it means. I don't know if it means that he's saying they're not talking about global warming, man, and the whole world's ending, man. They're not going to talk about it on the front page of the internet, man. I don't think that's what it is. I think he's actually talking about existence. I think he's talking about the wonderfulness of waking up and being alive and just being on planet Earth and just being here with people that you love and being able to make music. The big thing that's happening right now is nothing. That's, I think, the wisdom, I hope, that will come to me when I'm older, when I'm 87 years old and I'm still doing this damn channel. I hope that I'm able to say, I've got great news for you. Nothing matters. Just be alive. That's what I hope. That's, and that's what I get from this. In the long day before to the night of the morning after, we live on as memory of fate. It's so big that you can't see it, so large that it's you and me. It's nothing if not the dream we have is not coming true. So I think that's what this is. This death is so large you can't see it, and it's nothing. People swear it's a conspiracy, a dirty trick to get you and me into believing that something that's real. A nice harmonica at the end, and it's sweet. And so again, it's not clear if this is a song of environmental dread or a song of existential glory. I would argue it's both. And that's the strength of this album. When I continue to listen to this album, when I get my own copy, too close to Christmas, when I get my own copy of the album, I imagine the more I listen to it, the more I'm going to understand and be able to see it in that more favorable light. Let's go through the rest of the album a lot quicker. The song Love Earth. It's interesting because when Neil Young is talking about this on the Zane Lowe interview, he keeps on talking about the different people who wrote the album, as there's different people who are him. And I see that. That's one of Neil Young's great qualities, is his multiplicity, how he's able to be the guy who did Trans and the guy who did The Shocking Pinks and the guy who did Old Ways, I mean, Neil Young got sued by his record company for making albums that were too different, and one of those albums is just a typical Neil Young album that you couldn't possibly hope for a more acoustic, country adjacent, folky rock album, And it's funny because he complains, he gets really salty on this interview about someone saying that this song is a ripoff. And it's shaboom, shaboom, ha diddle 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 doom diddle, ha diddle 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 diddle, Love Earth, ha shibba. Okay, but who cares? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Hell, I keep on talking about that Shocking Pinks album from the 80s, 50s nostalgia. My personal favorite piece of 50s nostalgia, that and American Graffiti, I think are the good versions of it. But it does more than that, and it is reminiscent of that, but it's not a carbon copy. And then there's this introduction of a motif that goes throughout this album, which this might be Rick Rubin, it might not, of this sort of stomping and clapping sound. So it's like everyone is stomping on the ground and clapping at the same time, and it creates an urgency, and it helps the room to fill, It's funny because I'm at the end of the year here, and I started off the year with Black Country New Road, and their album, Answer Went There, which is still my favorite album of the year. Spoiler. But part of what made that album so great is its ability to record sound of a room. And this has, Neil has always been able to capture a room, and that's what we have here. Love Earth, it's such an easy to do. Love Earth till the water and the air is pure. Okay. It's not enough to love, Neil. You have to act. Okay? It's the whole damn problem with your generation. Old people these days, it's not enough to worry about something. It's not enough to love something. That doesn't heal it. You cannot love the earth until the water and the air is pure. You have to vote. You have to make sacrifices. Anyways. And then goes back to this question of we could bring the seasons back. Imagine that. This weird sort of very dark vision of the seasons being gone. I do wonder if there might be a part of it too where it's sort of a holdover from nuclear fears, like the very real feeling that you might be blown up at any time, which the boomers grew up with and is not really talked about very much. As far as I can tell, we need to have more sympathy for that generation for growing up in that kind of fear. I mean, everyone has fear, right? Kids these days are afraid of being shot in their classrooms. I was afraid of being abducted by people in vans. Every kid has a fear, but nuclear annihilation is pretty serious, and so it does make sense. These apocalyptic themes might sort of match up, like the fears of the 60s, 70s, and 80s with the fears of the nows. One thing, my biggest pet peeve of this album is Nils Lofgren. Oh, I just pissed off some people. I'm sorry. I like Nils Lofgren in general with Neil Young, but he does too much slide guitar. And I don't like slide guitar. I just pissed off my brother. My brother watches some of my videos too. Dude loves slide guitar. I love slide guitar too, very rarely. Like Mick Taylor and the Rolling Stones era. That slide guitar. But this kind of bluesy, just any time, if you're a guitar player and you go with the slide, just break your finger off and jump into the ocean. No one ever needs to hear. It's just so hacky and bad. Wow, I'm passionate about that. I didn't know I was that passionate about it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Tell me in the comments. Do you like Tell me in the comments and make sure you spell it properly. Okay? That's B-W. Next song is Overhead, which is great because it continues this sort of the jangly outro from the first song. It is on piano, and then here it's a great sloppy piano line. It's just awesome. It's great. Great, Young stuff. Steady bass and drums. Great backup singing. Some great lyrics from Neil here, too. I was walking in a dream and I couldn't get the message. Perfect. That's the kind of Neil Young lyrics I like. That cross between on the nose and slightly cryptic. And I love the movement of this verse as well, where you think it's just going to resolve, but it keeps going up. And then we get to this chorus where he says, "It's my love, it's my life, it's my death." Is not what he says. I looked it up. He says, "It's my day." It's okay. I think I can save it. I still think it sort of feels the same. It's the same basic idea. This is another one of these kind of meditations on death that is very upbeat, and you couldn't tell. Very 70s style, Neil, weird verse, Crimson Pirate on the big screen, and I'm looking at the ocean. Great. Perfect. That's my favorite style Neil Young lyric. Trying to see if I belong out there. I got a life. I got love and life and devotion. Got a chance to make a difference somewhere. Great. Perfectly vague. Perfectly cool. Crimson Pirate on the big screen. Just how he's able to put those together. Nice harmonica solo. As much as I am mad at the I'm happy that the harmonica usage on this album is very restrained and good. The older I get, the less I like harmonica in Bob Dylan and Neil Young. I can't explain that. It should be the other way around. But when I was younger, I was like, great. Now it's like, I have to kind of get through it. But it's great. And then we get to this heavenly bridge. And I say heavenly because it's both ethereal and light and nice. But it's also about heaven. Overhead in the skies of blue, I'm a bird and so are you. We can fly in the world there too. So I also think there's a version of this where there's kind of a cyclical time thing happening, where he's remembering his childhood as being a pastoral, green, verdant world where there's nothing sullied by any environmental horrors. He's sitting there eating lead paint by the fistful. Whatever, like that's where he grew up, and it was that. And then he's in this terrible sort of life now at the end of his life where everything's dark and dirty and on fire, but he's going to go to heaven. He's going to be a bird who's flying up there. So in a way, it's actually like this vision that he has of life in the past, which is obviously color, rose-tinted glasses, and can't possibly have been that gentle and gorgeous and wonderful with all that leaded gas. That like he's sort of returning to heaven, the heaven of his childhood. Beautiful lyric. I Walk With You, parentheses, Earth Ringtone, is the cringiest title I have ever heard. Earth Ringtone. Neil, people don't even talk about ringtones anymore. Like, that's not even a thing. Like, that might have been a thing 10 years ago. But it's a great song. It's maybe my second favorite song on the album. It's a sort of plodding and sweet is how I describe the music. A lot of gratitude for old age. Here, Nils uses the slide guitar perfectly. Because what he does is he uses the possibilities that the slide guitar has for creating interesting voicing behind the voice, like interesting harmonic notes. And it's very far in the background, but you listen to it, Neil's voice and Nils's slide guitar, and it's great. It's ethereal. I love it. Like, I just want to live inside that interchange, that sound that they're able to make. It's the opposite of when and. He's talking a lot about walking, which obviously is something that he does. And then we get this great sloppy clapping and banging bridge. The end of war, the price of life, the cost of care, the toll of strife, I walk with you and count the days. And then we get the first guitar solo. The first guitar solo? First guitar, 1, 2, 3 songs in, and we get our first guitar solo. Little hint, there's not a lot of guitar solos on this album. Which I think is okay, because the guitar solo itself is very tied to the melody. So I feel that the way this album was conceived of, I gotta make a song about that, hey? Like that whole thing makes sense that the guitar solos are not center stage, because the album is so melodic. And I wish the bridge came back. At the end of the song, that's my wish. That's my hope. That's my death. This Old Planet, parentheses, Changing Days. Another cringy title. I believe this is a reference to the TV show This Old House. Very kind of pedestrian verse talking about the autumn leaves don't fall in the spring. There's like maybe an accordion or a pump organ. I think it's an accordion here, just reminiscing about time as being a child. Because you see, back when he was a child, the sun would rise and the sun would fall. So it's great, because I'm raising these kids, and they go outside and the sun rises and it hasn't come down yet. We're just waiting, just waiting for the sun to come back. And I just want to remind everybody that all apocalyptic visions are narcissistic. That's how they are. Anybody who's ever talked to you about how things are going to end is just being selfish and self-centered. All right? That's all it is. It's just because you want to be there when the action happens. The idea that you could live when the world ends is a fantasy. A fantasy that your life is of such consequence that you are there at the ending. When actually, I'm sorry to tell you, you're not. You're not. You're not important. Your life doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter if you're Montaigne or the Pope or the President, Francis Ford Coppola. It doesn't matter who you are. Your life doesn't mean anything. You're not going to be there at the end when the sun stops rising and stops falling. Okay. Just a little word out there. Just if anyone ever tells you about like how the world is ending soon, that's the emotional core of it. The world is in trouble now. Oh my God, Neil. That's back to back cringe-a-thons there. But I love this, how the accordion here, or pump organ, I can't quite tell. I think it's an accordion though, like can't keep up. It's like a drunk style. And Ralph is barely keeping up on the drums. But then Billy Talbot is at his most active and doing his most interesting bass work. And I love the way the song moves to the post-verse, has this kind of blasting sounds. My memories of past delight me in all the things I found, because the earth has held me so, I will never let it go. Here, I like this, because the earth, I will not let the earth go because it's thrilled me so. This is that gratitude side, as opposed to sort of pretending like he's going to do something. At the end, it kind of sputters out, leads into the song Break the Chain, which is the low point of the album, and also kind of a high point of the album. It's got these blasting notes, the drums, I like how the drums are slow to pick up, some great Ralph work there, some feedback sort of finding its way, more slide guitar, and this idea of just saying break the chain. Like Neil has this tendency, he's had this tendency over the past like 25 years to just have these sort of like single line choruses where everyone sort of sings them at the mic. Sometimes it's great, like Change Your Mind, a top 3 Neil Young song. In the running, easily in the running. Change Your Mind is easily in the running for best Neil Young song ever made. And that's sort of that style. Change your mind, like just sort of song, like a refrain that's just one line. But the thing that's crazy is that everything else in the lyrics are interesting except for Break the Chain. I'm going to love every breath I take. I'm going to stay home in eternity. When I'm outside and I take a deep breath, it's like I'm dancing with death. Awesome. Just get rid of the break the chain. Just get rid of that, get over it kind of stuff. And it's a much better, more interesting song. In particular, this idea of loving every breath you take. The other night, I woke my wife up, like not screaming, but talking very loud. Because whenever I go to sleep, I often go to sleep in the middle of an existential crisis, and I think about dying, and I think about not living. Like it bugs me, the idea that like just not existing. And I know it shouldn't bug me, because when I don't exist, I won't know that I don't exist, but it bugs me. So I was thinking, in my sleep state, that all that matters is life. Like that's it. Like a little bit of life is worth all the remembrance in the world. So I woke my wife up by saying, I would rather have one more bowl of cereal than be remembered for 10,000 generations. And she's like, what? I was like, yeah. And I was asleep when I said it. But that's, I think, what I actually believe. Every breath you take, every bowl of cereal that you have, or as Warren Zevon would say, every sandwich that you eat, is more important than your legacy. Because your legacy is useless to you. What are you going to do with your legacy? So what? So I like that. I like this side of that, sort of the existential debate on this album. Then we get to the Stamp, Long Day Before. What I like is that the next song continues in that kind of brushy drum mode. Very, very clearly melody-led here. Nice pump organ, walking on the road, talking about his life, where he apparently walks 3 miles a day. He appears to be using a rhyme book here. He says, don't tarry. Or is that like a Canadian word? I feel like the Canadians use the word don't tarry, which means don't wait. Anyways, Walk with me, brothers and sisters of the future, the world as we knew it and the earth as we knew it. Hand in hand, fist to fist, with no more weapons, no more war. Ah, he started off so good. I love this idea, walk with me hand in hand, the idea of solidarity and working together. But again, just don't sing no more war. Like this song, I like very much, but also it drives me crazy because I imagine being at a Neil Young concert with a bunch of boomers all sitting there screaming at the stage, "No more war!" Just, come on, Neil. I don't know. It's okay. Can you tell I'm processing a lot of things right now? Like that's, if you feel like you can see transparently through me and that I'm showing all these biases and it's very clear, that's on purpose. I want you to see those biases. I want to be emotionally and spiritually naked before you as I'm discussing these issues of sort of generation and frustration and anger towards the older generation and fear for the future generation. That's on purpose because that's what the album's doing too. The Wonder Won't Wait. Musically, the song's kind of on autopilot, but I really enjoy this because, carpe diem is an expression that was popularized in America by Robin Williams who directed that movie? Peter Weir. In the Peter Weir movie, Dead Poets Society, starring Robin Williams, where he talks about, seizing the day. But seizing the day often would be a technique that poets like the French poet Ronsard would use to just seduce young women and sort of say like, well, I'm old and I can tell you I'm going to die, so maybe we hook up? Like that's what a lot of poetry was about back in the Renaissance. But in general, though, the carpe diem idea of seizing every day is great, and that's what I think is funny is that this album is called The World Record, which appears to be just a pun. Just like, haha, it's about the world and it's a record. It really should be called The Wonder Won't Wait. I think that's what it is because these are great lyrics. And he's talking about, these lyrics, I'll read them to you. It's kind of a march of a song, kind of a sloppy, imprecise, crazy horse march. I'm in the air, I'm all around the bank where your money pays for crimes against me because I'm the earth and I want to live. The wonder won't wait for me. To swing at the stars and in the sky, take some time to live before you die. So here we are. We're just in that mode of enjoying every breath and taking some time to live. And then the song gets much better with the great clamping and stomping motif coming back. And the outro, this pump organ and talking about standing outside by yourself. I started off my review of the song by saying he's on autopilot. And then by the end, I realized this is actually great. This might make it onto the Neil Young mixtape as well. Then we get to the song Chevrolet, which is the song I circled because I always want the longest songs. Those are always my favorite Neil Young songs. Down by the River, Change Your Mind, doesn't matter. Whichever song it is, it's on a Neil Young album that's going to be longest. That's the one I'm going to like the most. Yeah, Crazy Horse. Because it's going to be them jamming and Neil playing choruses. Playing solos. And I got to tell you, this is not my favorite song on the album. This almost feels like it was put on the album to be the long song. It's definitely a ripoff of the song On Broadway. There's lots of lights, said stars and guys on Broadway. Doop doo. Nailed it. But the song's about not buying a Chevrolet car and saying how he couldn't enjoy it with how much gas it uses. Another rare guitar solo in the beginning, but it's just another melodic guitar solo. And the first time I was listening, I'm like, it doesn't need to be this long because it doesn't really move. But then there's this other section, the Lost and Found section, which is kind of interesting. And again, I'm still thinking about, my old car keeps breaking down. My new car ain't from Japan. There's already too many Datsuns on the road. I'm still thinking about the hypocrisy about how when he was 35, he was totally fine buying gas-guzzling cars, but now he won't. But it gets way better. The song gets way better. So in the end, I am happy it's so long. Because there's later a solo where it's kind of doubled and it's more interesting. And it's still melodic, but it's a little bit more exploratory. It's not quite, a great Neil Young solo, but it's still better. And then we get these lyrics, like, on the road in my old Corvette, new mama said we have a baby on the way. Soon enough, we lost all contact. We were young and foolish. That's behind us now. So he's connecting us to the song New Mama, one of his songs from the 70s. New mama's got a sun in her eyes. Anyways. All of Neil Young's 70s albums just kind of merged together for me, so I'm not going to talk about which album it's on because It's tonight's the night, isn't it? Wait. Is that possible? Is it possible that it's on Tonight's the Night? I think that's one of the ones that I used to skip because I was not very smart. Let's see. It has to be. Boy, you're really pissed. Yeah, it is. There you go. There you go. New mama. He was on Tonight's the Night. So, you know, like this idea of connecting to his fans back in their older... Oh, by the way, I have to show this. This is one of my favorite photos of Neil Young ever. This is him during this era. Backstage at the Roxy. Damn. Living rough, Neil. So, you know, kind of like drawing that parallel, I think is nice. And in this way, he's using the car not just to be like, I can't buy gas guzzlers anymore. Better buy the Tesla. But which don't buy a Tesla, by the way. Or buy a used Tesla if you want. Don't buy anyone. You're not helping anybody. You know, but the idea that he's tying it together with his Corvette as being the car that goes through his life, and he's using the car as a connection to driving back and being told he's going to be a father to his mother, and then of course he's no longer with the mother of his children. So it really saved itself with this verse because it becomes a lot more interesting and personal and connective as opposed to just an old guy who likes old cars. Because there's a lot of old guys who like old cars. So it really saved itself in that verse. And then even more less structured guitar work, kind of pinging, punishing, pulsing guitar work. And really by the end, I was happy that it was this long because it puts the whole album into better perspective just with that one verse where he's sort of using this metaphor of a gas guzzling car and seeing he's going to have like it really is a sentimental journey through the past, you know, the kind of thing. Like Neil Young has been sentimental and sending us through his past since he was like 20, right? That's part of his artistic vision is to do that over and over and over and over and over again. And then he ends with a refrain of This Old Planet, and this is great. This is the kind of stuff that when I was a Neil Young super fan, I just loved because it's like a dirtier, smokier version. He's almost whispering the lyrics. It's a better version. It's like intimate. It's a reminder of the rawness and the awesomeness of Neil Young. So that's my review. I think it's great. I think it's another great album. I think I preferred Barn, but maybe not. I think all Neil Young albums I can't judge until 5 years after they're released. I didn't like Greendale until way after. You know, like he's that great of an artist that he's always ahead of you. It doesn't matter if you think you can sit there and you can smugly say, I figured out what he's doing. He's always ahead of you. And he'll always be ahead of you. So have fun catching up. I'm talking to me. All right. My Patreons. Now, they did not buy this album behind me. This is, again, a gift from my dad to my stepsister. So they didn't pay for that. But they did actually help me buy. I was at the Record Archive in Rochester, New York. They don't sponsor me, but I think you should go there. It's a great place. They have an online website as well. It's local. Keep them in business. I have a record store. I did buy the Wise Blood album, so thank you. And Wet Leg. I bought both those albums with their money. They gave me money, and I took that money, and I supported artists. Isn't that fun? Isn't that a fun thing to do with Patreon? All right. Until next time, go Morocco. There's the camera.